It's Bible Club, it's Bible Club, it's Bible Club in our town. There's singing, there's laughing, let's get the word around. We're all excited, we are all delighted. It's Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club, Bible Club in our town. Hebrews 9:15. Somebody think they can read it nice and clear? Kurt and Josh. Time for our lesson. All right, let's see if Victoria can read it. Okay, you guys look along and see. All I want is the first half of it. Okay. Well, be quiet. Listen to Victoria.
And for this causes he is the
mediator
of the New Testament.
That's good. And for this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament. Alright? Who do you think he is?
God.
Earlier in the chapter, it tells us who he is. But so in this verse, we got to think, who is he? Who is he? I heard some people say close, and I heard some people say correct.
Jesus! God! Moses! Jesus!
Okay, now, and I heard some people say something that they remember too. Okay, so Jesus is God, but in particular, this he is talking about the mediator of the New Testament, and so that is going to be Jesus is the he. Somebody said Moses. Was Moses a mediator?
No. Yeah.
Last week we talked about how Moses was a mediator. Let's show the picture. Remember? Moses went up into the mountain and talked with God. Moses was the mediator of the Old Covenant, or the Old Testament. And what was another word that we said covenant was? I'm trying to think. Ian and Cody and Aiden were not here last week, so you want to listen so you know what we're going to talk about. Okay? What was another word, Jaden? Boys? What was another word, or maybe you can describe it, when that for a covenant? What was a covenant? Nobody remembers? Did you just help her? What was a covenant? What? A promise. Kind of. A promise. Maddie? A law? Yeah, kind of. Because he gave laws, but he gave laws and he gave laws and then he said, and made a covenant with those, and the laws were in the middle of part of that covenant. Amos? Your hand knew, but your mouth doesn't. Okay. Does he know? Stephen, do you know? What's a covenant? Another word for covenant? Don't know that one. Eliza? The Ten Commandments? No? Alright, so, remember we told the story about the principal in your class? Yeah, the principal in your class. Promise, but there was another part of the promise. There was the principal promised to do something. Two-letter word, if, right?
Yes.
Right? So it was what's another word for promise, Maddie? An agreement. Remember we said agreement. So there was an agreement made between the principal and the class that if they did something, he would do something. Right? And God made an agreement with the children of Israel, his special people. Remember? And they said, does anybody remember how many times they said, we will do what God wants us to do? Remember in the story last week, in the lesson last week? Ian?
Yes.
I know you're listening. I know you are. But you're making noises that makes it hard for other people to listen. Okay? So just be careful that while you listen, you don't make noises like, don't play with that in your mouth. It's going to make noises. So, we said, the people of Israel, how many times in our lesson last week did they say, we will do what anything God wants us to do? Maddie, do you remember? It was 3 times. And they said, we will do. And then Moses went up there and they said, you go, Moses, you talk to God for us because it's too scary when God talks to us himself. Because it was like lightning and thunder and great big loud trumpet sound. And then his voice was even bigger than all that. And so Moses went up and talked with God. And Moses was the mediator of the covenant.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's just put it in your pocket so we don't accidentally do that again. So Moses was the mediator of the covenant, right? And then, did the people keep their side of the agreement? They didn't. God said to them he wanted them to do certain things and to live a certain way. Does anybody remember the very first thing that he said that he didn't want them to do? The very first thing that he did not want them to do. Said, thou shalt not.
Kill.
That was one of them, but that was the first thing.
Thou shalt not steal.
That is the 8th one. And thou shalt not kill is the 6th one, but the first one.
Thou shalt not steal.
The first one, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. That was the first one. And the second one was, thou shalt not make any, we'll just say, idols. Right? Thou shalt not have any other gods before me, and thou shalt not make any idols. And Moses went up to talk to him, and he was up there with God for like 40 days. And after a while, the people were like, what happened to Moses? Right? Remember? And they went to Aaron and they said, we don't know what happened to Moses. Make us some gods. And they broke their promise, didn't they? They broke the covenant with God. They built an idol, and they were worshiping the idol, and they broke the laws, the covenant that God had with them. Now, God is always God, and he wanted to help his people Israel for years and years, for generations, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years, he was their people. And sometimes they would do what God wanted, and when they did what God wanted, do you think God blessed them? Yes, because that was their agreement. God said, you do this, and I will bless you. But then if they didn't do what God wanted, then he punished them, didn't he?
Yes.
That was the agreement. Was God being mean by punishing them?
Nope.
He was just keeping his side of the agreement, wasn't he?
And he still loved them.
And he did still love them, because as soon as they would stop doing what he didn't want them to do and start doing what he wanted them to do, he would start blessing them again. Yeah. So, and all this time, for years and years and years and years, they'd go back and forth. Sometimes they would do what God wanted, and God would bless them. And then sometimes they would not. They would disobey God, and God would have to punish them. So, even all the way up to the time when Jesus was on the earth. And Jesus was born of his mother was was an Israelite. So Mary was an Israelite. So just like Mary's great grandfather was David, King David. Yes. So Jesus lived among all those people, but Jesus was different, right? Because he wasn't just a man. He was totally all man, but he was also God. And he knew everything. And one time, he told the people of Israel that were around there listening, and there was rulers there. I don't know, we might call them like senators or councilmen or something. They were rulers of the people there, and they heard Jesus tell this story. Now, when we tell stories, we just kind of tell what happened. But when Jesus told this story, he was telling two things at the same time. He was telling a story about something that happened, but it also had a second meaning. Sometimes we say something and we mean something else too. So Jesus told a story about a vineyard. A vineyard is a place that grows grapes. Have you ever had grape jelly or grape juice? Yeah, so those come from grapes, right? And these grapes were growing in, we'll say it was in the grape farm. It's really a vineyard, but we'll say it's a grape farm, and they had the owner of the grape plants, the grapevines, built a fence around it, a wall, so that no animals would go in there and eat the grapes before they were ripe and ready to be harvested. And the owner got some people. He said, "Here, you take care of my vineyard, of my grape plants. I'm going to another place. And when it comes time to have for the grapes to be harvested, so that they can be made into grape juice and grape jelly and everything else, I want some of them. You keep the rest." That's a deal, isn't it?
Yep.
That's an agreement, isn't it?
Yep.
So he says, "You guys take care of it. You can have everything except for some, and when it comes time, just give me some." So those people, they were taking care of the vineyard with all the grape plants, and it came time for the grapes to be harvested. They're pulling them off the plants, putting them in their baskets, and getting ready to make everything out of the grapes that you make out of grapes. And what do you think happened? The owner sent one of his servants, right? He sent a servant, and the servant came and said, "I'm here from the owner, and I'm here to take some of the grapes." And the men, they saw the servant and they said, "We're not giving them any of those grapes. You can't have these grapes. These are our grapes." And they beat him up. They did. They beat the servant up, and the servant, finally he got away. And what do you think he did? He went back to the owner. And did he have any grapes with him? No. What did he have? Bruises and scratches, right? Yeah. So the owner, what did he do? He sent another servant, maybe bigger, stronger servant. And that servant came, and he said, "You're supposed to give me the grapes." And what did they do? They ganged up on him, and they beat him up. They beat him on the head. They punched him in the stomach. They did all kinds of stuff. Yeah, and what did that servant do? He went back to the owner. Did he have any grapes? No. So these guys, he just had bruises and cuts and everything. These guys, are they keeping their side of the agreement? No, they're not. So the owner, he sent another servant. Well, it's his grapes, right? So he sends another servant, and this time, what do? They beat him so bad he dies. They kill the servant. Yes, they kill the servant. The owner's sitting there at his home thinking, "Where's that servant?" He hears news. They killed him. So the owner finally says, "I'm going to send my son. I'm going to send my son there because they will respect my son. They will reverence my son because they'll know he's my son. He's the same as me. Someday, my son is going to be the one who's their boss. So they'll respect him." And so the son went. And the son is coming down the road, and the men, the workers in the grape farm, what do you think they did? They said, "That's the son. If we kill him, the whole farm will be ours." And so what did they do? They ganged up on him, and they killed him. They killed the son. And Jesus is telling this story, and Jesus said, "What do you think the owner is going to do? You think the owner is just going to let them have the farm? The owner's going to come, and he's going to beat, and he's going to take his farm, he's going to take his farm away from those people. They won't be able to do anything with it, and Jesus said he will give his farm to other people who will keep his agreement." Well, everybody that was listening to Jesus' story, they knew that was an awful story, but even worse, they knew what Jesus was saying. Jesus was talking about the rulers. The rulers of the people, God had made an agreement with them, and God said, "I want you to obey me," and what did they say? No. And God sent prophets, his servants, to preach to them, say, "You ought to be obeying Jesus. You ought to be obeying God." And what did they do? They beat the prophets. And other prophets came and preached to them, and they killed the prophets. Finally, God sent who? He sent his son, didn't he? Now, who's telling the story? Jesus, and Jesus is the Son. And so, finally, God sent His Son, and what did they do to His Son? They killed Him. They beat Him, they whipped Him, and they killed Him. And Jesus was saying this before it actually happened, but the rulers, they knew that they did want to kill Jesus. And the people that heard the story, they thought, oh no. If the rulers killed Jesus, God, what was the rest of the story? God is going to come and take His arm away from the people and give it to other people, right? And they thought, this is awful. But they could not stop it. So God told that story about the agreement. Jesus told that story about the agreement that God had with His people and how His people were not obeying. Were not keeping their side of the agreement. In fact, a couple days later, Jesus was on a high hill in the deep valley between, and the whole big city of Jerusalem was in front of Him. And He looked over the city of Jerusalem, which is where the capital city of all the Israelite people. And He looked over and can you tell what He's doing here? It could look like He's praying, but something else. And He's crying. Jesus was crying. He saw the whole city there, and He began to, the Bible says, He began to weep. And He cried. And He said, oh, Jerusalem, oh, all you people, how many times I would have liked to teach you and tell you what God wants. I would have liked to teach your children and tell them what God wants for them. But you wouldn't let me. And He said, and He said, it's going to be awful. Not many days from now, your enemies are going to come. They're going to build a trench around your city. And then they're going to attack your city. And they're going to break down your walls. And they're going to break down your most important buildings. And not one piece of a building will be on top of another building. Jesus was so sad. Jesus was God. Jesus was part of the God who had made an agreement with these people. And He wanted them to do what was right and what was good. But they didn't want it. He wanted to teach them. But they didn't want it. And Jesus knew that they were going to get punishment, and it wouldn't be long. And you know what? It wasn't long. Like 35 years later, the big army came, and a few years after that, they burned the whole city. Yeah. But for those years, people were telling them that they needed to turn to God. They never turned to God.
Wait, I have a question.
But now,
That brown thing.
well, that's like a rock or something. This is the city. It's a long way away, and this is Jesus. It's not really Jesus. We don't know Jesus. But now we want to think about Jesus. So He told that story, but Jesus was a Jewish man, wasn't He? Remember, His mom was Jewish, and the man that raised Him as His son was a Jewish man. So Jesus, as a Jewish man, do you think Jesus kept all the things that God wanted Him to keep? Did Jesus ever disobey? When Jesus was tempted, one time the devil came to Jesus and said, see those rocks? Jesus was really hungry. In fact, He hadn't eaten for 40 days. That's a long time. And Satan said, if you turn those rocks into bread, people might believe that you're God. You should just do that. And Jesus said, nope, I'm not going to do that. Because the devil is telling them to do that. And then the devil said, look, all the kingdoms of the world, everybody in the whole world does what I want. And I will teach them to do what you want if you just bow down and worship me. You think Jesus did that?
Nope.
No. All kinds of different things Jesus was tempted by the devil to do. But did Jesus do anything that the devil wanted him to do? He didn't. Jesus did keep the agreement, didn't He? Now, did the people of Israel keep the agreement God made? No. But Jesus kept the agreement.